Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jenn Hook from Replanted. Looking forward to our conversation today, Jenn.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
So, Replanted does a whole load of different things to support foster and adoptive families, including an annual conference. And I noticed you've got Isaac Etta talking at this year's conference in October, which is great to see. He's been on the show a couple of times. A real great guy and a change maker in the adoption space.
Yeah.
So, as always, listeners, encourage you to look at the show notes and find links to the guests and to the websites and their socials, so you can find out what's going on there. And we'll dive in with the kind of the usual question that we're starting with at the moment, Jen, is thriving. What does thriving mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it looks different for me and for everybody, specifically in the foster and adoptive journey. I think thriving means, your family, you've got a good enough level of support around you where you feel like your family, is doing okay and you're not just trying to survive. Um, I used to work as a trauma therapist in the foster care system here in the US. And just so many of my families felt really undersupported, isolated, alone. And my kids felt that way as well. And part of that was just a really big lack of trauma-informed awareness for churches and support systems, the schools, all of the above. And it really left our parents fighting hard for their kids. And then also sometimes just really unsure how to meet their needs, kids with trauma histories. And there's just a lot of unique elements, right, to the adoption and foster journey that you're navigating. And so when you don't really feel empowered or certain with how to go about those journeys, it can be really hard. And so I think for me, thriving is really about a family. It doesn't mean everything's going perfectly. There's no behavioral or emotional issues. That's unrealistic. I mean, all of us struggle in various ways with things like that, right? But I think thriving means you wake up in your day and you feel empowered, right? You feel like, okay, I've got the skills, I've got the knowledge, and I've got the support system to come alongside my family, my kids, myself, my spouse, to really help us get through the day in a way that's loving and full of grace and helping our children heal from what they've experienced. And so, yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
would say for that. But I think it looks different for every family. Every child's needs are unique. And there's a varying degree of needs and where kids are at in their process with their stories and things like that. And so I think that's something that's deeply personal as well. What does thriving mean to you as a parent, to your children, as a family, as an ecosystem,
yeah.
Mhm.
So, nice and broad-ranging topic. Nice and broad-ranging description gives me lots to dive into that. So, I guess just looking down on what you said, you've got that kind of the internal side to thriving, the
Mhm.
knowledge and the skills that we have as individuals, and you've got the external aspect as well in terms of the support that we have for
Mhm.
ourselves and
Mhm.
our families. So clearly, Replanted is all about that
Yeah.
support, about being that support, the wraparound. People use that word, don't they, a lot at the moment? Wraparound.
Mhm.
So yesterday I did a podcast and I actually touched on grace, and
Mhm.
that you mentioned that as well today. Uh, so I thought that would be a nice little topic to kick off on from within the broad description that you've given. What does
Yeah.
grace mean to to you, Jen?
Yeah. I mean, Simon, this is the backbone of Replanted. When as I was working as a therapist in the foster care system, I saw a lot of churches encouraging families to foster adopt, and rarely did they show up and say yes to supporting families on that journey. And I just saw so many of my families hurting and kids feeling misunderstood or labeled as defiant, bad kids, willful. And I think what grace is, and this is really the pillar of our Replanted. So for Replanted, we do Replanted groups, and the three pillars for those groups are grace, safety, and vulnerability. And for me, grace means you are loved no matter what, no matter how messy your life is, no matter what your circumstances are, whatever your background is, whatever situation you find yourself currently in, that you are loved no matter what. And I think that's a beautiful reflection of the gospel, right? Like Jesus loves us no matter what. There's nothing we can do to be separated from his love. And as Christians and just as people in general, how beautiful would it be to show foster and adoptive families that are maybe in the thick of the messiness of the journey, kids that have maybe really significant emotional and behavioral issues because of their experiences, to say, it's okay. I love you. Like we're here for you. No matter what, you can't push us away. We're going to keep showing up for and loving you and checking in on you. Um, I think that's just a beautiful experience. In our replanted groups, one of the things that we want our families to experience is same here moments. And really what that means is when you share your story with somebody and, maybe I'm talking about how challenging this journey's been, or parenting my daughter has been extremely hard. And someone says, same here, I'm in that situation. I've been there too, right? A lot of times they're just like, oh, you see me, right? Like we're best friends now. Like there's something really bonding about going through a shared experience, but having that spoken language, right? And so you get that with your community, like at a replanted group. So when there's a shared experience, it's easy to give each other grace because you know how beautiful it feels and you know how to give that empathy because you've been there. But grace goes beyond that, right? And that's really where our support systems and our churches need to come in, instead of saying things like, well, you chose this journey, or, you signed up for this, or, your kids' behaviors are too big. We can't support them in Sunday school. To say, like, we love you no matter what. You are always welcome here. And what can we do? What can be our role to help support your family and your children better, right? I think that's really how what we see, Jesus do on his time on earth, right? It's just like loving us no matter what. And so grace for us is just something that's really, really important. I remember we had a woman come to one of our support groups, and she was thinking about relinquishing the rights to her teenage daughter because they were just in such a spot, significant safety concerns in the home. They had to lock away knives, and she had just felt like she had done everything and was in this place of desperation, and came to a replanted group. And I think a lot of times when we hear that, there's situations where we're like, oh gosh, that sounds really hard. And then a lot of times we don't want to see families broken apart, right? Too. And so what can we do to support you, or how, we want to try to stop that from happening. And I said to our leaders, I said, the first thing we need to say to a parent that's in that situation is, we love you no matter what, and you are always welcome here, whatever you decide, right? That's grace, right? Like a family that's in that position, that's not a decision you make flippantly. It's not a decision that you're like, yeah, actually, this is too hard. I'm just going to throw in the towel. Like you've been in a really painful spot for a very long time, and you've gotten to this place where you feel totally desperate and feel like that's your only way out. And when you can understand that place of vulnerability for a family to come in, and like there's shame around that, even thinking that for a parent a lot of times is like I have failed, I have let this child down, there's so much shame there, right? But when you can step in and say, we love you, right? And meet that shame with grace, I think it's just the most beautiful expression of love. I think it's an expression of Jesus' heart. And it's my hope that the foster adoption community will just embody that in a more whole way, especially support systems and churches and schools coming around our families. That grace would always be a pillar.
Yeah. One of the things that I touched on in the interview yesterday was kind of grace for one another, but also grace for ourselves. And I think
Mhm.
that can be, I don't know, can that be tougher? It kind of seems to me to be tougher. Grace on ourselves is tougher than grace for
Yeah,
others sometimes.
yeah. I think because of probably our past experiences too, right? Like I think sometimes, I grew up on a farm in Canada, and we didn't talk deeply about things. And I think there is this element of like, you need to earn, like, if I'm a good Christian, things will work out for me. There's like these platitudes and things that aren't true that we really do start to believe. And so I think it is hard to give ourselves grace, right? I think it's easy to hold on to the shame or the ways that we failed instead of saying like, it's okay, you know? And I think it is sometimes easier to give other people grace more than it is ourselves. Anne Voskamp, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her. She's a Canadian writer, and she has this quote that I love, but she says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." And I think that's how we give ourselves grace, is to be fully vulnerable. A lot of times we don't experience grace fully because we only go so far with our story, right? Like our story's too big. We don't want to overshare. It's too much for people. And sometimes because it feels almost embarrassing, right? Our stories. But when we can share fully our story and receive grace from others, I think it's easier then to give ourselves grace, right? And I think that's the beauty of community. We're not meant to do this alone. And so I think when we're wrestling with the inability to give ourselves grace, getting it from people that you trust and care about and can care for you well can be a good model of them being, getting yourself to a place to allow yourself to give it to you,
Yeah.
and receive it. So
So it's a bit like, is it a bit like we other people see our strengths before we do. So if they give us grace, then maybe we'll give ourselves it easier. It comes from
mhm,
outside first, is
mhm,
I guess the
mhm.
question or the suggestion, Aman.
Yeah. I think it can be that way, right? I think that's the power of like a church community as well, right? When you can be this like the hands and feet of Jesus to one another, I think that's where you can experience a lot of grace and have that modeled to you. And then I think it's a little easier for you to internalize that and to try to give yourself grace in situations. Because the day-to-day parenting, right? Like we're not going to do it perfectly. There's times where I've responded to my daughter. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And goodness, like they have so much will at that age, And so there's times where, even as a therapist, right, I will respond to my daughter and I'm like, I can't believe I did that. I never thought I'd be a parent that would say or do these things. And I found myself in this place of anger and just yelling, right? And I'm thinking to myself afterwards, I know better. Like I've got some decent amount of tools. I used to be a child therapist, like, and I think grace, when you can catch grace in those moments too, grace looks like repairs, right? To say like, shoot, hey Autumn, I didn't handle that very well and I'm so sorry. I don't want to yell at you. I was feeling frustrated, but that I shouldn't have taken it out on you. And I think when you can kind of step back and then realize like God gives that to us all the time, right? Saying like, hey, it's okay. We get redos in life all the time. We get to do repair and forgiveness and reconciliation as part of our relationship. And I love you no matter what, like I feel that way with my children, right? And so if Jesus is giving that to me and I can give it to my family, why can't I give it to myself, right? And so I think that takes a level of vulnerability, right? And a willingness to say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to receive that, and sit in the discomfort and to push in too. I think, as a therapist, right? Like I worked with a lot of birth parents who were trying to reunify with their children and they were coming from really sometimes very messy backgrounds, substance abuse, domestic violence, um, various things. And, as I heard their background and their stories and the pain that they were coming from, of course, grace feels hard, right? There's sometimes we think we deserve it, right? We deserve what we get and the outcomes that are happening to us, or I'm not a good enough Christian. And these are just lies, I think that just get us off track. And so But I think stepping into why does grace feel hard for you to receive? Why can't you give yourself grace? And exploring that more deeply is an internal question that we need to really dive into and come to terms with to see what that block is about.
Yeah,
Is it something you just believe? Is it something you were taught, like maybe as part of your religious upbringing? What is that source and unwillingness to receive grace?
yeah.
And I think when you can shed light on that, then you can start to move forward.
Do,
So
do you have a name for that gap between what you know and what you do?
I don't. Do you,
Me neither.
Simon? Yeah.
Me neither. Um,
Yeah. I think just being a work in progress, right? I think all of
yeah,
us are a work in progress. And it's a kind of awareness, right? When you can bring maybe something that you're resistant to or feel reactive to, when you can identify it, you've brought it into awareness. And when you're in that awareness phase, that's really where growth can happen, right? That's really the launch pad. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's an official name for it,
no.
but yeah.
This is an unusual one, but it came to me. What's the opposite of grace?
That's a good question. I would say judgment, shame, embarrassment. Yeah. Do you have
Yeah,
any ideas you have as
yeah. I
well, or any
think
words that came to your mind?
as you were thinking, I was thinking being hard on ourselves.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then and you said judgment, which is one word for my four, so that's great. Uh,
Yeah.
and and as you said judgment, I was thinking about the is it do people call this? It's the Old Testament version of God
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
angry judge.
Wrathful.
Yeah,
Yes.
kind of
Yes,
stuff. Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talked about earlier on about, this shouldn't be happening to me as if I'm a good Christian or something like that.
Hmm.
So what is the New Testament version of God or a more modern version of God, um, or Jesus that's less judging? Where's the shift? Why do we think of an Old Testament version of God as wrathful and angry and judge? Where's life moved on from there?
Hmm. I mean, I think it's with the death of Jesus, right? Like God didn't send Jesus back to the earth because he's like, hey, you guys all pulled it together good enough that I'm going to do this for you, this significant act of love for you, right? Like Jesus showed up regardless and said, hey, I'm going to die for you. And it's the biggest act of love. And I think in that too, we experience God in a more human way, right? Because we see a God who experienced the fullness and the range of emotion that we and made in his image experience, right? Like with the death of Jesus, like you see you have a God that's going to experience the most pain that anyone could experience with the death of his son more significantly than the pain we'll ever experience, right? And then with the resurrection of Jesus, we have God experiencing the most beautiful reconciliation and like joy of redemption with his earth and creation. And that joy is probably more full and complete than we could ever experience on earth, right? So I think in the New Testament, we see more of a humanity to God and being made in his image, I think. Um, but I will say, like Simon, I think, I grew up like I better not do anything to like tick God off, right? Like he's going to judge us and he's going to be mad and like, don't do anything wrong. And so when I did something wrong, like it felt terrible. And, I think as I've matured in my faith, that has shifted. And and I think the ways that I can give myself grace more is because I want my kids to be able to do that. And my kids are going to model what they see. And so if I'm going to give them grace, but I can't give it to myself, they're not going to do that either as they grow up and transition into teenagers and adults, right? They're going to internalize and be hard on themselves, right? In the same way. And so I think it sometimes kind of pushes me, right? Even if I feel like, I deserve this or grace feels hard. It's like I need to continue to be open to it. I want my kids to see that and have it modeled to them that we serve a loving God and there's nothing that we can do to be separated from him. And if they see me modeling that in the most painful moments of my life, what does that look like when they experience painful moments? Because those are coming their way. We can't avoid it. Um, so
Yeah. The,
yeah,
the modeling word was at the back of my mind about 3 seconds before you said it. Uh,
yeah,
and my wife and I haven't got any kids, so I'm sometimes reluctant to dive in to the parenting aspect, right, of
yeah.
kids, of adoption and podcasting. However, on this occasion, maybe I can ask a question from somebody that is a mum, right? That is a parent. Ha- Is to what extent is parenting about modeling?
Oh, I think that's almost all it is.
Yeah,
No, I mean it's a lot of modeling. You know, I think we're all just we typically raise our kids based off of how we were raised as kids, right? It's kind of our default, right? And there was really great things that my parents did as parents that I love and I hold on to, and I want to instill that into my parenting. And there's things that I hated and didn't enjoy or wanted to do better or that were just totally lacking in their parenting repertoire. And I think part of that was modeling vulnerability. My parents were very like stoic. You don't show emotion. You don't talk, the deepest conversations we typically have are talking about the weather, and that was something that I, we have a lot of fun together though. We have a great time. Fun is a big part of our family uh, dynamic. But with my kids, I said, okay, there's elements of things that I enjoyed about my childhood and what my parents showed me. And then I also want to show them more. And I think kids learn through modeling, right? And connection, and seeing and looking to the people they trust. And so if I can show my kids, like, hey, if I mess up, it's okay for me to say that and to own it and to seek a repair. That was something, when I was a kid, I didn't experience a lot of. My parents rarely apologized. I almost would dare say never apologized when they were in the wrong. And it was kind of, you just moved on and pretended it never happened. And so for me, it's really important that I model what it looks like to own a mistake and to apologize to even, I've been doing this to my children as early as they understand words, when I feel like I could have done something better. And I think modeling, I want them to see how I interact with peers and friends and how I talk and communicate. Um, they're watching, right? They're very impressionable and when they're young, especially, like you're their world, right? And they trust you the most. And so you have a really strong influence on what that looks like. And just yeah, just being, I think with modeling it means having like integrity, right? Around who you are as a person and what values your family holds, that you want to be aligned with, right? So, but I think it's a lot of modeling.
modeling.
Mhm.
What what does in like in the crisis moments in the meltdowns? uh, it, in the moments that we're finding it hard, uh, uh, we're finding it really, really tough to keep calm and carry on. Do you remember that meme before? I think
Hmm.
it was before the pandemic, wasn't it? Keep calm and carry
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And in those crisis moments where thing, things are really going off,
Hmm.
and we want to be that. We want to be that peace.
Hmm.
We want we want to be able to uh, not react to their reactions.
Right. Yeah. That's hard to do.
Yeah. What have you learnt around that? And
Yeah, that's a
perhaps
really good question.
grace for ourselves when we lose it, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been on both sides of that equation. You know, I'll tell you, I'll tell you a couple stories. So when I was still working as a trauma therapist, I had this little girl, she was 7 years old, that came into care. Her parents were abusing substances. She really wanted to go home to them. And they were missing visits all the time because of their drug abuse, and they were just really struggling. And she was placed with a, a kinship placement with her four siblings. And then it was just too much for that kinship placement. There was a lot of children in the home as a result, and they said we can't do it all. We would love to, but we can't keep all four of the kids together. And so my kiddo got separated from two of her siblings. And so when we look at, these are all trauma experiences for a child, right? And so she got to this place where um, she moved into a stranger's home with one of her siblings, got separated from two of her siblings, who, and one of them whom she was very, very close to. So it was a very traumatic separation for her. And at this point now, I'm the only person in her life that's been around for a year. You know, everyone else is new in her life, and she's just spiraled. And it makes sense, right? When we understand, like, our kids are, their brains and bodies aren't ready for big things like this. You know, I can barely handle really hard grief experiences as a 41-year-old adult that has a fully developed brain and the ability to understand how to cope and use my skills. And so imagine a 7-year-old that's put into all these situations and experienced all this grief and loss in her life. And of course, she's not doing well. And so she spirals into, it was really heartbreaking. She got into a really, really bad place. And I was working with her, and I remember this one time she came to my office for counseling, and we had our session, and then it was time for her to go home. And the caseworker came to pick her up to take her back home, and she just was refusing to get in the car. And so I'm using all my therapeutic tricks, right, to try to help her. You know, giving two choices. We use a lot of trust-based relational intervention over here, which is a really great resource to help kids with trauma heal through relationship. And we finally agree that I I can carry her to the car and put her in the car. Now, one thing that's important to know is she had earlier taken off her boots because they were hurting her feet, and it was the middle of winter. And so she didn't have shoes on. And so I get her to the car. I'm holding her shoes, and I got her to the car, and we open the car door, and she loses it. And she starts hitting me and kicking me in the face, and she's wailing on me. And I can't put her on the ground because it's covered in snow and she's got just socks on. And so she continues to wail on me until we get back into the building, and I put her down, and then she runs into my office and gets under my desk. And like, just being fully transparent, I was not happy, right? Like, I've just been assaulted, you know. Um, and I'm literally shaking at this point. And the last thing I want to do is help her. And so I had to take a moment where I stepped into another therapist's office and I had to take some deep breaths because I knew I was going to have to re-engage with her, but I was feeling so frazzled by what had happened. And then I had to remember she is 7, and with her trauma, she's functioning at more of a 3 to 4 year old level. And she's experienced some of the hardest things a 7 year old could ever experience. And her getting into a car is another separation from somebody she cares about and trusts, which is me. And that's a trigger, right? Cars take me away. I might not see people I care about again. And so when I could reframe what was going on there, I was able to walk back into my office. She was hiding under my desk, and I just crawled under the desk with her and I sat there with her and I validated her feelings, right? Like, it sounds like you're having such a hard time and you don't want to go home. I wonder what's going on there, and just reminding her, like, I'm here for you. You are going to come back here and see me again in a week, just trying to give her as many affirmations as we could and help her cope and deal with her feelings. And that sometimes is hard to do, right? I've had situations with my daughter, right, where we she blows up and and then there's part of me that's like, I know you've got the skill set, right? And like you're just refusing to do something or something you're capable of, and this is super frustrating. And so there's times I think where, like, as a parent we can model like trying to cope and deal with our feelings or to vocalize it, like, mommy's starting to feel really frustrated that you're doing this. I need to take a minute to calm myself down, and showing kids what to do with big feelings. And I tell my daughter too, like, it's okay to feel really mad. It's not okay to hurt somebody when you're mad, right? Like, mommy feels mad too sometimes, and try to model that. But one thing that I've gotten in the habit of is when I do lose my cool and I get really frustrated with her, um, for me, I feel this responsibility of, like, I'm the adult in this relationship. Like, she's still doing imaginative and creative play and thinks like maybe she could fly if she put on a set of fairy wings, right? So like we're not, she can't, she's not going to be like, oh, I'm going to use a coping skill and take a deep breath right now. Like, that's not always going to happen. And so as the adult, I feel the responsibility to do the repairs with my kids. So I'll come in and say, with my kids, especially when they've lost it, I don't try to do any coaching or teaching. So one of the things we know, and as a therapist, I know, like, when a child gets deregulated, the only goal at this point is to calm them. They are not going to hear you, any threats, any consequences that you're going to try to dish out. Is not going to matter because that part of their brain is shut off. It's in the frontal lobe, that higher level executive functioning. It's where their language skills are, all of it. And so their amygdala is taken over. And at that point, as a parent, you got to just stop and realize you got to help your child co-regulate. It's what we do with babies, right? A baby cries and we go and we rock them and we coddle them and we tell them they're beautiful. And, we tend to their cries and we sing their songs. We still need to do that with a 4, 5, 6, 7, and sometimes older, right? Especially kids with trauma. They're not a 14-year-old. Their trauma cuts the age in half by about 7. So your 14-year-old looks 14, but is functioning more like a 7-year-old, right? What would you do to help co-regulate a 7-year-old? So in those moments, a lot of times I'll do redos with my kids once they've gotten calm. Like, hey, we had a hard time with that scenario. Let's try it again and then end on a high note. And I'll do that with myself. So I'll come into my daughter's room and say, hey, sweet girl, I think mommy needs a redo. I did not handle that very well. And I want to try again. And I show her that. And it's, Simon, I will tell you, it's some of the funniest things. My daughter now will come if we've had like a break or she was having a hard time doing something, and totally melts down. Once she gets calm, she's actually come to me and said, like, mommy, can I try again? And like, she because we've done it and rehearsed it as a family. It's part of our language. And like, as a 3-year-old, one of the sweetest moments I had with my daughter, she's having a really hard time going to bed, refusing to put on her pajamas, like, do all these things. And like, bedtime for a lot of kids as a separation, it's really hard, right? And the meltdown was unbelievable. And I was even trying to co-regulate her, and she was just not having it. And it was rough. It lasted for about 45 minutes. And then we got to this point where she was able to calm down. And then I was like, hey, sweet girl, can we talk about what just happened? And then I just said, hey, and we had just had Caleb come into our family. And so I was like, I wonder if you're feeling a little bit jealous because Caleb's here and you're wanting more time with mommy. And we started talking about stuff. And I'm telling you, it was the best conversation we've ever had. And then as a 3-year old, like she's been talking for less than a year, right? Says to me, hey, mommy, thank you so much for talking with me about that, all of that. You know, you're the best mommy. Like it just was so meaningful to her that once we were able to do a repair and talk about it all, like that connection had been reestablished. And so, you know, I think it looks different when our kids are in the biggest meltdowns of their lives. Sometimes as parents, we're able to, you know, recognize what's going on and try to hold it together and take care of ourselves to step into our child's calm. I will say a deregulated parent is not going to calm down a deregulated child. That never, ever, ever in the history of the world will work, right? A calm parent can help calm a deregulated child, though. And so sometimes we can do that, right? And then sometimes we've had a rough day, or this is our 10th meltdown of the day and we're fried and we don't handle it well. And I think that's where, what are those family rhythms that you got? Like we do redos and we do repairs. And now I see it. Now that my daughter's 5, she initiates some of this stuff, which I think is just so cool. So
Yeah.
it's not perfect. And please hear, there's no judgment for me on this. There's been times where I'm like, I nailed it. That was really good parenting I just did. And there's other times where I'm like, I can't believe I'm a parent. I suck. Like, you know, I feel
Yeah.
that range, you know.
There's a
So
lot of humor, and you can probably hear the smile in Jen's voice, right? You can probably hear that. There's a lot of humor in your grace.
yeah, yeah. That also might be a defense mechanism, maybe. No, but yeah,
It doesn't
I,
it doesn't
yeah,
feel like a defense mechanism.
yeah,
Maybe a therapist would say it's a defense mechanism. It doesn't feel like a
no,
defense mechanism
yeah,
for being on the receiving end of it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's a kindness. Thanks, Simon. I
yeah,
appreciate that.
totally. Um, yeah, we're not very good at taking compliments, are we? Giving and
No,
taking compliments.
yeah, true.
I I've got a little story for you on that. It's nothing to do with parenting and nothing to do with adoption or anything. But we were talking about holidays before. Sorry, vacations, as you would call them. Um,
Oh no,
before.
I call them holidays because I'm Canadian. I live in the
Okay,
US, but yeah, we're Celsius holidays. I've got you. Yeah.
okay. I didn't know Canadians did call them holidays. Well, there we are.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, we met some people on holiday, and we'd seen them during the day, and then we saw them at night. And this woman had she had a dress on. I said, that looks. I love the color of that. I love that dress. I love the color of it. And she, and she was like, what? I'm like, well, I had a shirt similar color to that years ago, and it kind of reminded me of it. I bought that shirt because it was a nice color. Seeing that color there, I think it looks really great. And she was like, the look said, "Are you for real?"
Right. Yeah.
I, and 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 I had another go, and then I gave up. I just thought that she's not gonna feel this.
Yeah.
She's not gonna receive this. She's not gonna
Right.
receive this compliment. Um,
Hmm.
the barrier was up, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a dress. It was in a
Yeah.
nice color.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
w- one of the things that I sometimes talk about when I'm doing a training for parents on how adoptees feel, right? So I'm not telling them
Mhm.
how to parent. I'm just sharing some of the wisdom that I've learned along the way from other adopted parents, usually. And one of the themes is not taking our kids' trauma personally.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Uh, and and I go further than that if I'm talking to an adoptive parent, like their trauma isn't your fault. Your kid's trauma
Right.
isn't your fault. It's not.
Right.
It,
It's
it
not.
happened.
Yeah.
It happened before you.
Right. Hmm.
It happened
Hmm.
before you.
I think too, like that's what's so tricky, right? Is like a lot of times parents are addressing trauma that they did not create, but there can be some significant emotional and behavioral responses from kids as a result of those experiences. And then what I see is sometimes the hardest is when parents anticipate kind of the classic parenting skills to be effective. I was kind of raised as like compliance is the goal, right? Like if my parents say something, I need to do it, and if I didn't, then there'd be a consequence, right? And that's great for a child that's grown up in a kind of classic or standard environment that didn't, experience a rupture relational trauma. But for kids who have that, that doesn't work, right? It just turns on their amygdala, their fight, flight, or freeze response to their brain. And so Simon, like that example of that girl, like she's punching me and kicking me now. I could have got her back into the office and then just been like, that is unacceptable. You do not treat people that way. And I could have railed on her, right? Um, and it wouldn't have done anything. It wouldn't have helped her heal. And because I needed to understand what I was responding to, right? Like this isn't a bad child. She's a precious child. And she's had some really hard experiences in her life. And when they can understand what was triggering her, it wasn't about me. I know she didn't want to hurt me. She cared about me. But her brain just the amygdala took over and off she went, right? And so I think sometimes, that's are you familiar with Karen Purvis? Is
Yes.
that a name
Yeah.
that's
Tiberian.
familiar? Okay. TBR and Karen Purvis. So I got to be trained by her in 2014, I think, or 2015. Sweetest lady of all time. I was like, I wish you were my grandma. um, but one of the quotes I love that she's got is like, we can be in such a hurry to give a child consequences, we forget we're teaching them to do life. And that's something I really hold on to is like, especially as I like kind of have that narrative in my mind, like and I don't fault parents for this, right? It's normal, right? You're the parent, you're in charge, and you want your children to like grow up to be constructive members of society, right? And you're trying to set them up for success. Like this all makes sense to me. And our kids are coming to us with really big hurts. Um, like when we step into that space with them. But yeah, Simon, I'd be curious to hear more about what you encourage parents or what
Yeah.
you know
I,
what you're
I'm. I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get them to an insight.
mhm,
I think. Until we change, nothing changes, right?
mhm. Yeah.
The one of my things on this is that uh, people say time's the greatest healer, but if there's no change over that time, there's no healing. Like
Mhm,
it's not the time. It's not the time that does the healing. It's the changes. It's the insights. It's the things that we see,
mhm,
you know, see differently.
mhm.
So I'm trying I'm trying to create a space for insights,
Yeah.
so that but I can't. There's no such thing as a second-hand insight. Like
Yeah.
we have to have them for ourselves. It just doesn't work. We can't force somebody to see it, to have an insight. Whether that's a fellow, an adult that we're talking to, or I couldn't force that woman to see what I said as a compliment. She thought it was a Mickey take, to put it politely. She
Mm,
or she thought I was being she thought it was a criticism. I was playing fun. I was making fun of her. I was criticizing her, whatever was going on. I couldn't make
Hmm.
her see
Right.
my compliment.
Yeah.
She saw a criticism.
Yeah.
And so we have the shift has to be internal, and
It does.
you
Yeah.
know, time isn't the greatest healer.
Hmm.
Insights are.
Hmm.
And you know, you talked about validation earlier on, and in that space with that little 7-year-old girl that was losing it, it was all about the validation. Um, you shared you shared the teachable moments
Hmm.
for a later date,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and your wisdom told you what to do in
Hmm.
the in the moment, and there was a little you talked about setting in a stepping into another office. I remember a thing that happened to me in lockdown. I sensed I overreacted to something from my wife, and then I think I overreacted again, and then I just thought, okay, I've got to get out of here, and I just went off for a walk. But
Hmm.
that's kind of that's wisdom in the moment, telling you it's a
Yeah.
just in time thing. Wisdom, it comes to us, it comes to us in the moment, and it, it, you know. And so when we're doing all this planning, we don't have the benefit of insight in the moment. We don't have the wisdom in the moment. And when we know when we you know when we know what to do, that is the wisdom that's going to get us through. We can't plan wisdom
Hmm.
like we can't
Right.
plan an insight.
Hmm.
But you know, like people, I asked I come up with these really strange questions, you know, and parallels. Okay, so like, I hear healing, right? We're always some adoptees, adult adoptees. Some people don't like the word healing, but
Hmm.
it's kind of the best that we've got. So
Hmm.
okay, so where are we wrong? Where is society wrong? Incorrect, right? Um, it's incorrect in saying that time is the greatest healer. No, not at all. No,
Yeah.
it's change.
Hmm.
Um, and so we see if we're brought up to expect, you know, we're brought up by parents that expect compliancy, and then we try to teach our kids from who have had ACEs, you know, advice child
Hmm.
expect
Yeah.
if we expect from them. So we have to. It's got to be about a change in our expectations.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and like, I mean, another Karen Purvis quote, we can't bring a child to a place of healing we've never been ourselves, right? Like, if we're not willing to do the work and identify our rough edges, right? You know, it's going to be really hard to get our children there. And that's true for attachment as well, right? It's like, you're not a securely attached adult. It's hard to raise a securely attached child, right? It won't happen. And so there is an element, right? Like, there's always this tension, I feel, right? Because I get, I work with parents a lot and I do talks on defiant children and especially from a trauma lens and trying to help them understand like it's deficit, not defiance, right? And like there is an element, I'm sure, as a parent, right, where maybe some of you are listening right now and like I've been doing these strategies all the time with no change. And I just feel like it's my parenting now. Like there's something going on with me, right? That we're not seeing change. But it's it's a both and, right? Like it's there's also like growth that's happening for your children and for you and like and it's not linear, right? I think we always expect this like okay, grief, loss, trauma, you know, we're going to see it's going to go up and to the right on a regular basis and that's just not real life. And it can be 2 steps forward, 12 steps back. It's, I think it's just being in it together. But yeah, there is an element too where it's like, okay, what's mine to own and what's not mine to own? Like you gave a compliment, that's a kindness, right? But there was a block for the person receiving it, right? And we call it shark music, right? Like what's going on in your head where you interpret things kind of in a negative light. Like all your experiences come through this filter of like there's shark music playing, right? It's like if you attach shark music to a shark theme, that makes sense, right? But if you have shark music to a beautiful scene of a campfire with friends, right? That's a bit of a mismatch, right? And so there's stuff, right, where it's like you gave the compliment, but there was a block for her, and that's more about her stuff and not yours. A lot of times we take it on as ours as well. And so, yeah, I'm not even sure where I'm going with that, but I think, I love personal growth. I'm a therapist. I did my own counseling for years, just because I think it's good work and good practice to do. It makes me a better spouse and mom and friend and leader. But yeah, it's hard, it's hard work.
Yeah. Feels like a great place to bring it in, Jen.
Yeah.
It,
Mhm.
is there anything else you'd like to share?
Um, no, I mean, I can share some of our resources, Simon. Would that be helpful? I think
Well, they're all on the website. If you want
they're on the website. Great.
if you want to
Yeah.
point anybody at anything particular on the website.
Yeah, I mean, we've got our two books that I think are really helpful: the Replanted Faith-Based Support for Foster and Adoptive Families, and then Thriving Families, a
Brilliant.
trauma-informed guidebook. And what I love about the Thriving Families book is it's not just trauma; it's all the other uniquenesses about the journey that families might encounter. Being a transracial family or navigating birth-parent relationships. How do you talk to your child about their story? So it's like a holistic approach. But one invitation I would love to extend to any listeners is we have this conference that's more like a retreat than a conference that's specifically to support foster, adopted, and kinship families. We have voices of adoptees and foster alum and birth parents, and it's just a really nurturing conference that also has lots of practical tools. So if you're also listening, like how do I support my child or help them through their experiences? There'll be a lot of that in it as well, but you'll also just get lots of emotional, spiritual support. Obviously, we host that in the US, so you're probably thinking, well, I'm not going to come to the US, which is totally fair. But we simulcast it, so you can sign up to
Yeah.
watch the virtual event and access all of the materials that way as well. So if that's something that would be helpful, we'd love to have you participate. So
Brilliant.
yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jen, and thanks, listeners.
Mhm.
We'll speak to you again very
Yeah.
soon. Take care. Bye bye.